new agenda. This will be the important agenda, and this will be the important one for them to sustain business even in the short term going forward.
On your roadmap also, can you say a little bit about the timelines and
exactly,
deliverable?
The deliverable, I think detailed timelines, short term, is basically within next year, what we are going to implement. 19 and up to 19 and 20. Then medium term, the 22, I think 21, 22 like. Then beyond that, there's another 5-year period, the long term. So there are clear timelines and strategies. I think I don't think I have time to read this or discuss all these things. There are clear timelines, and we are very committed to deliver and get all the stakeholders on board and implement these timelines, based on the timelines, all the study activities. Okay. With that, certainly that will help the banks and all the other financial institutions, and we would appreciate the cooperation from the SCC and insurance as well in this exercise. And also the SMEs, like there are a new regulator coming on, Minister of Finance, on the microfinance regulator. They are also are now going to work with them as well.
Okay. Just a quick question to the CAC and to SEC. Is there a way of creating more awareness about this? Because finally it's going to help poverty and improve protect the environment, right? Is there a way of bringing this more to the attention of the public and the corporates?
From the CSTC's perspective, awareness happens, Mr. Virakodi. We have 195 companies that include some which are unlisted, who do adhere to sustainability, who have a segment on sustainability in their annual reports. The other point I just wanted to distinguish when you asked Mr. Nandala, I just wanted to say that so far, the first half of this year, 12 governments had raised 47.5 billion, and mostly for transportation. Okay. That's a key area that we can look at with these green emissions and stuff like that. So this is happening. We are, to come back to your present question, we are in this process of having regular interaction with companies to try to bring this part and inculcate the necessity and the importance of having sustainability. Now, although it is voluntary for us right now, in India, the top 500 companies have mandatory, that's called business reporting, BRI, I think, have to mandatorily have a segment on sustainability in their annual reports. Vajira would like to say.
Just to expand on what Ray said, in the equity market, I mean, already the companies, they would themselves realize the importance of these additional disclosures. But if I may say some on the fundraising side, I think these are, it was mentioned earlier, a lot of investments in renewable energy. So for that, I think the government has a big role to play. Okay. And also in terms of renewable energy, I mean, a country like us, whether the solar resource is tapped adequately. I mean, that is definitely going forward in terms of large-scale investment. Definitely the government will have a role and be able to play a catalyst role in actually promoting green bonds in terms of investment in infrastructure in renewable projects.
Yeah. In your roadmap, do you have a plan that you will get at least 1 or 2 corporates to get this done?
Your roadmap probably.
No, again, it has to be whether a private sector investment in a renewable energy infrastructure project, whether they would have that, whether they would be able to come up with a project with that scale is a bit doubtful. So that is where I say, in terms of a large-scale infrastructure project, I think the government has, in my opinion, a role to play in promoting this.
On the regulatory side, you have got it right, no? Where people know that it's doable and these are the...
Again, as I said, I mean, we have...
There's one question here, they're saying the legal side is not fixed yet.
No.
And that is one of the reasons.
Again, as I said, I mean, the difference, I mean, we already have a framework for corporate bonds. So the additional requirement is in terms of a green bond, really identifying the instruments which can be classified as sustainable,
Yeah.
and also incorporating the eligible products. So
Yeah.
the framework is already there. It's just a matter of tweaking it to suit the purpose of what you call the green bond.
Oh, okay. Before I open it out for maybe one or two questions and close it, talk a little bit about the blue bonds and what are some of the South Asian countries that have floated.
Well, I think so far in Asia Pacific, the countries that have issue, I'm talking about green sovereign. Yeah, I'm talking about green sovereign bonds. I'm not talking about green corporate bond, which that has happening a lot. I feel that at least in order to set a benchmark for the country, maybe the government can also take the initiative, right? Because we, of course, government already issue sovereign bonds. It would be nice, I think, to have a benchmark for green sovereign, for example. Fiji has done that. It has been at least oversubscribed when it was issued. Indonesia has done green sukuk bonds. Hong Kong had just issued one of the largest green sovereign bonds this year. So I think the market for green bonds are there, and if you see from the statistics, it has somebody has pointed out it has double and it has triple. So the interest is there, but I think as a first step, probably also would be good to explore the possibility of government issuing their first green sovereign bonds as a benchmark for others to follow. But of course, I mean, if the private sectors are interested, that's nothing stopping them. I also like the idea of exploring the regional dimensions of issuing bonds, or whether that's green or blue. The blue bonds we use for oceans-related matter, which also countries in the Pacific are interested in. Fiji will do that. We have an ocean project. So in countries that are small, there probably needs to mobilize regional efforts in terms of issuing, developing regional bond, regional capital market. So I think that can be explored as well. I mean, small countries, like for example, the one that we work on in Bhutan, actually, when we first started the project, people said, Bhutan only have less than 1 million population. What are you doing? But that shouldn't exclude countries, whether big or small, to issue, because they can also always issue regional option. And SCAP would be also very happy to facilitate that conversation.
Just one quick question to you, Nikhil. There's a question here on what are the sustainable insurance products that are on the market?
I think, so I mean, we are a life insurer. We don't really have general insurance in that sense. But one of the key SDGs was about reducing poverty, improving wellness and health. So we are very focused on that SDG of wellness and health in bringing that to a broader and wider audience and making it much more accessible and available. So that's something that we do. I wouldn't say it's sustainable, but it's certainly on our ESG framework.
I can take two quick questions.
Dinesh, mine is not a question but a suggestion. Quite frankly, I think that we have, when you say scale up, I remember ISCO, we were at a meeting in Grand Cayman, growth and emerging markets. Then again, there was a discussion with ISCO in Sydney, and most recently in St. Petersburg. So I have suggested to them, and Vajra was there, that they need to get their act together to do a lot more, lot faster. And I do not accept the position that we need to wait for governments, Vajra, because you can have large-scale, cross-border, private-to-private projects, right? I think the central bank has done a fantastic job. It's a roadmap. But I was suggesting to Dinesh that the roadmap has a timeline which has to be advanced. And to advance it, I'm not asking you, the central bank, to do it alone. Don't you have a steering committee? Is the steering committee with the coalition of stakeholders? Who are they, if I may ask?
There are stakeholders from regulatory authorities as well as the industry, both.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Ray, my point is that the CSC really has, your research guy is here, and I think he's on the panel in the afternoon. You're part of the World Federation of Stock Exchanges. ISCO's June submissions on sustainable finance has been referred to the World Federation. Can I ask you, because I think there's a role that you guys have to play. I'm not wearing my SEC chairman's cap here. I'm just saying that the CSC has a role to play that it may not be playing. You should, by now, you have your indices, and I don't think you have your frameworks yet. No. You don't. Vajra, there is no framework, Dinesh. So there is work to be done at the level of the CSC. And given your association with sustainable stock exchanges, with your World Federation of Exchanges, because of that might you have on a global scale, you can do it. I would like to tell my colleague in the profession, Dinesh, I've mentioned to Paul Andrews of ISCO in St. Petersburg, that rather than ISCO inbreeding amongst itself alone, regardless of whether it is a global body, they should take into account the evolution, the harmonization of standards, whether it's ISO standards or the International Financial Reporting Standards. And I know for a fact that the firms I work with, the Big Four, they are all heavily eating, thinking, drinking, researching, and producing guidelines for various sectors. Now, the ISCO chap, if you recall Vajra, he said, well, it's a very complex thing because there are different industries and sectors. My God, harmonization of standards cuts across all those, identifies the key issues sector by sector, which is oil and gas or something else. So, Vajra, I think we at the SEC also, you should get a team together and get them cracking because, these young guys, they can be exposed. I think the central bank has done a fantastic job. I would urge the ICC to get that coalition of stakeholders. I have some thoughts for you, together with SCAP. What more of a deal do you want? And, whether it's insurance funds or pension funds or passive or active funds, they have to have a rationale to put in the money, right? And I would urge the private sector, you see, how did we energize or incentivize pioneering ventures going back 20, 30 years? How did we incentivize the capital market? By creating unit trusts. So I believe that the World Banks, the IDA funds, and all of that must get together and see whether they are going to use the conduit of the banking system, central bank as an apex, to see whether we can provide the finance that might be available with some concessions to the private sector.
Now, Ranil,
And
now
just a minute, that also I'm going to say,
Yeah.
the European Commission, I have a fairly long history about this, Dinesh. Algo shared his inconvenient truth long time ago. What are we doing? I believe that the accounting profession, the stock exchanges, the securities regulators, the ISCO, the chambers of commerce. Now, what has the Ceylon chamber done up to now? The collective chambers must do a lot more work. And as far as the private sector is concerned, I think if they are provided with an incentive, qualifying investment relief and so on and so forth, they would very well get into that. And provided this funding, you can't have banks giving low-cost funding. We can't afford that in this country. But if the UN, the World Bank, and all these multilaterals are indeed as serious as they are, spending so much money and time in exotic locations, put that money towards smaller countries to facilitate at least SMA funding. European Commission, many years ago, had what they call, and I'll close with this, the Pollution Control and Abatement Fund. The Pollution Control and Abatement Fund incentivized or gave funding to SMEs who would form a cluster and have what you call a shared effluent treatment facility. This is a very small micro example. But I believe that the global institutions, whether they are IFACs or the ISCOs or the accounting bodies or the others, haven't yet got together and harmonized as I recommended ISCO to do. So I'm positive.
So let me park that with Dr. Nandalal, maybe something that you should look at. A couple of hours ago, a journalist was telling me that a company had approached the SEC to do a green debenture, and apparently he was told that the structure was not in place. Is that correct?
Green debenture?
Yeah, a green debenture.
I remember some time ago there was a Islamic product.
Okay. No, this is a green debenture for a renewable energy product.
Would you like to ask that person to give me a shot?
Sure.
Like you did a few days ago about another party?
Yeah, sure.
Don't assume nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
If you don't get an answer from the SEC, just call the jam.
Okay.
But
So
for
it's
the
doable,
debenture
right?
issue-
It's
yeah,
it's
for the
doable.
debenture issue,
Yeah,
they should
yeah.
actually go to the
No, they had.
CAC.
I think they had asked whether it's. Well, finally, it needs to come to you as well. No? Fine.
Because it's
Yeah.
the CAC.
Like
Yeah.
AIA came many times. We
Yeah.
were open to policy.
Okay. Ravi, do you like to? Okay.
I actually want to say the more or less the add-on to it, because if somebody raises a green bond, the regulator should be able to ensure ultimately that funds go exactly to the purpose for which it is intended.
Agreed.
The taxpayer money. I don't think none of our regulators, whether it's banking or, are ready with those tax money, so that if somebody comes forward, here is the process.
So it's a capacity issue also.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
That is what I said.
SCAP can do a lot to help us frame those standards
Before
of.
going to SCAP, ISOs and all that have to get together. We don't need capacity building for this. We need, there is a body of knowledge. We must leverage that body of knowledge and get our people working on it to develop the framework. That is what it is.
Tissa, you are associated with the SCAP person, so you can ask the final question.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to be three musketeers asking questions. Okay. Now, see, we are all misled. Climate crisis, or do we need a climate correction? Crisis means you run away. Correction means you get involved. So it should be a climate correction. And the easiest way of doing climate correction is controlling pollution, air and water. So if we take, for example, this country, we are not very serious about controlling air pollution, water pollution, and also the use of single-use plastic. There is no control in this country. Now, certain countries have banned the single-use plastic. We don't care. I'm a member of the BAC as well as ESBN, and I was in Bangkok, October 31 and November 1 attending. I raised the same question at the ESBM. Crisis means you run away. Right? We need everybody to get involved in a correction of climate. So as I mentioned, there are two important things, air and water. Now, for example, this country, forget about the funding. Private sector got involved in planting trees. Okay, that was for show, for television. We were supposed to plant 1 million trees. We have been planting 1 million trees every year. Where are those trees? Right? If you fly over Nuwara, now, during the time that Suddhas controlled this country, you couldn't cut a tree above 5,000 feet. But now the privatized tea companies are cutting all the mountain tops. There are no trees. Just take a helicopter ride over Nuwara. And then the army went and destroyed about about 100 acres doing foxhill.
We'll take that offline.
Right? The same thing was done in Anuradhapura and places like the building racetracks. Virgin jungle destroyed. So we have to plant. And one of the shortest methods of planting trees is by aerial bombing. Now Australia has wildfires, USA has
So I'll have to
wildfires.
stop you there.
Yeah, okay. What they do is aerial bombing. We don't do aerial bombing of seeds.
Finally, as Trump said, money changes behavior, no? So, so to close this session, maybe I'll give you the last word. So what's your message to the audience?
Okay, thank you for giving an honor to have the last word. I'm sure that many people have many insights to share. I just want to say I appreciate a lot this kind of dialogue with key stakeholders, government, private sectors, securities, regulations, because I think that at the end of the day, to achieve SDG goals or achieve doing good, right, doing sustainable development, first is private sector needs to be active, and I'm sure, and from what I see, engaging with them recently, they are active. ICC is also a private sector, very active. But the public sector also have to do their part in terms of providing enabling environment, regulations, and incentives. I feel that, of course, as some other panelists mentioned, that doing green, being in sustainable investment can cost more. So I think setting up standards, setting up regulations is important, but it shouldn't be too much regulations, too much burden on the private companies. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. But of course, there needs to be a certain standard to see whether whether investing in these activities are sustainable or not. Do we contribute to sustainable development goals? So I would actually prefer that we take a more like guidelines or voluntary or willingness to do rather than putting a lot of regulation standard companies have to report. Because in some, for example, if you have your stock exchange, you put too much regulations in them, they will not list in your exchange, will list somewhere else. And I think Sri Lanka and also developing countries still need those money. So it's better to incentivize and put guidelines. And we are ready to help if there's anything that SCAP can do to facilitate that.
So I'll take you on that offer and see how we can
Yes.
further this initiative.
Yes.
So on behalf of ICC, I thank all the panel. Panelists rather, can we put our hands together for them? Thank you very much.
If we have everyone tarry on stage for just a little while, we're going to have Mr. Virakodi hand over a couple of plaques, one to Dr. Subanij, the Chief Financing for Development Macroeconomic Policy from UNSCAP, a token for her, and also to our guest of honor here present today, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, the Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. Thank you very much. And we're going to be inviting Shanil to hand over tokens of appreciation, Shanil, to all of our panelists on this occasion. All right, Shanil is here, set and ready to our panelists. So there's Rohan, Dr. Rohan Fernando, Mr. Nikhil Advani, and then who do we have? Okay, there we are. We have Vajra Vijay Gunawardena, and then after that, I think it's going to be Sujiva. Yes, Sujiva. And finally, Ray Abhivardhana, the chairman, Colombo Stock Exchange.